Iran's nuclear negotiations have been arguably one of the most remarkable diplomatic struggles of the past decade. After years of negotiations, an agreement has never appeared to be more in reach. With the deadline fast approaching, a number of outside players have ramped up their efforts to prevent an agreement from taking place. Israel above all.
Prime Minister Netanyahu's standard response to everything is that Iran is a threat.
In this program, we shall explore why Israel is so concerned about a peaceful ending to the decade-long drama.
It has always been trying to divert attention from the Palestine issue.
It creates a source of need, if you like, in the United States, need for Israel.
And what are the tools that Mr. Netanyahu is using to convince the Western powers against a possible deal?
My friend, standing up to Iran is not easy.
The center of speech by Netanyahu in the US Congress was on Iran, that Iran is a threat.
He was preaching to the converted anyway, so I don't think he won any new friends.
In September 2012, in a speech to the United Nations General Assembly, Mr. Netanyahu made Israel's stance on Iran's nuclear program very clear.
A red line should be drawn right here, before Iran gets to a point where it's a few months away or a few weeks away from amassing enough enriched uranium to make a nuclear weapon.
Of course, this was not the first time Israel had warned against an imminent Iranian nuclear threat. One of the earliest claims, made by the second highest-selling Israeli newspaper, Maariv, goes back to 1984, when the paper's headline stated that Iran is in the final stages of production of nuclear bomb. In 1992, another strong push for action against Iran was made by the then Israeli parliamentarian Benjamin Netanyahu, when he painted Iran as the #1 enemy of Israel.
He first spoke up about the threat of an Iranian nuclear weapon 23 years ago in 1992. And since then, at regular intervals, he's been telling the world that Iran was only a few months or a year or two away from acquiring a nuclear weapon.
Of course, it's a very handy thing for the Israeli Prime Minister to have, to keep claiming Iran is about to develop nuclear weapons. We've had other cases of people crying wolf, as we say in Europe, when Tony Blair claimed that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction without being specific as to what these were, and they were an ever-present threat to Britain and others. And we went to war in Iraq, and look at the consequences of that. And were there any weapons of mass destruction? No.
We have a saying in Hebrew, we call it Mifchan HaTotza'ah. You would say it in English, what's the bottom line? And the bottom line, again, is that Iran fully dismantles its military nuclear program.
The alternative to a deal for them is that Iran completely surrenders. So Iran would agree to completely destroy its civilian nuclear technology, and that is something that can never and will never take place. Therefore, logic dictates that the alternative is exactly waging a war by Israel and the United States. Actually, the United States prodded by Israel against Iran.
People who've looked into his motives are fairly convinced that he doesn't actually believe that any longer, if he ever did, that Iran is intent on acquiring nuclear weapons, but he wants the world, and above all the United States, to believe in the reality of this threat, because it creates a bond or a source of need, if you like, in the United States, need for Israel. So it helps to consolidate the relationship between Israel and the United States.
A nuclear-armed Iran is completely counter to Israel's security interests. But it is also counter to the national security interests of the United States.
We have intervened on Israel's behalf in the last 2 years more than a couple of hundred times in over 75 different fora in order to protect Israel.
A world without America, without American leadership, without her moral voice, your moral voice, would be a darker world. A world without your friendship would invite aggression against Israel.
I think there are all sorts of difficulties around the Israeli position. The first thing, of course, is they themselves are not members of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran is. They have never revealed any kind of, they've never allowed any kind of inspection. We don't really know exactly what they've got.
سالهای زیاد و بودجه‌های بسیار زیادی رو رژیم صهیونیستی خرج کرد تا به مردم دنیا به گونه‌ای القا بکنن که جمهوری اسلامی ایران مسس با بمب هسته‌ای، مسس با هنجار شکنی.
Perhaps Mr. Netanyahu was correct in his claims that the Islamic Republic will always remain Israel's sworn enemy. Iran, on her part, has not concealed her official defiance to recognize Israel as a state.
در منطقه ما زخمی سالهاست بر بدن دنیای اسلام نشسته در سایه اشغال سرزمین مقدس فلسطین و قدس عزیز.
In 2005, a statement by Iranian authorities strengthened Israel's claims that Iran is an existential threat to the Zionist regime. Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, the newly elected president of Iran, was quoted as saying, "Israel must be wiped off the map." A strong quote by all standards, or as some claim, a misquote.
No Israeli government can tolerate a nuclear weapon in the hands of a regime that denies the Holocaust, threatens to wipe Israel off the map, and sponsors terrorist groups committed to Israel's destruction.
Jonathan Steele, a Guardian columnist at the time, argued that Mr. Ahmadinejad's original quote was lost in translation.
Wiped off the map were the 4 words that people took from what Mahmoud Ahmadinejad had said. Actually, it was a mistranslation, and unfortunately people got it wrong initially, including the BBC monitoring service, which analyses these things and it translates broadcasts for politicians. From experts I've spoken to, they told me that the word wiped off was not used. It was actually something that could be translated as vanish, will vanish. And there was no reference to any maps at all. What actually he said, Ahmadinejad used the phrase, and I'm probably going to pronounce it wrongly, Safhe Ruzgar, page of time or page of history. And the funny thing was that Ahmadinejad was quoting an original statement made by Imam Khomeini. And so obviously if you're saying that the regime occupying Jerusalem, again, he didn't actually use the phrase Israel or even Zionism, just the regime occupying Jerusalem will vanish from the page of history or the page of time. So it's a vague reference to sometime in the future there will be no regime occupying Jerusalem. It doesn't mean that today or tomorrow Iran is going to start a war against Israel and wipe it off the map.
Nobody else in Iran came up to support this statement, and Mr. Ahmadinejad has now gone. And Mr. Rouhani has in fact gone out of his way actually to be quite appreciative and respectful of the Jewish faith. And indeed, you know, something people in the outside world don't know is that the largest Jewish population in the Middle East outside Israel is where? It's actually Iran.
But the crux of the matter is that despite her well-admitted opposition to any mandate for the State of Israel, Iran has never threatened to attack Israel by military force, although she has been repeatedly threatened to be attacked by Israel or the United States.
I have said that when it comes to preventing Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon, I will take no options off the table. And I mean what I say. That includes all elements of American power. And yes, a military effort to be prepared for any contingency.
I believe that it's the combination of a credible military threat and the pressure of those sanctions that have brought Iran to the negotiating table.
Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, the leader of the Islamic Republic, was quick to adjust any misperceptions.
Ayatollah Khamenei made a statement saying that Iran has no intention of aggression against any nation, and it was interpreted as a deliberate rebuke to what Ahmadinejad has said, and to show that the top person in Iran was not taking the same view as the president. He wasn't given, of course, the same news coverage in the West, certainly not in Israel.
This was not the first time Ayatollah Khamenei had attempted to clear the misunderstanding surrounding Iran's political stance and its nuclear program.
Ayatollah Khamenei issued a fatwa against the production, stockpiling and use of nuclear weapons and all weapons of mass destruction.
I think that was a very interesting and very important statement and very important document, barely reported anywhere in the West. The Supreme Leader issued a fatwa against the whole principle of nuclear weapons as being morally repugnant and wrong.
The struggle for a deal on Iran's nuclear program goes back to more than a decade ago. 2005 is remembered by many as a golden opportunity to achieve a breakthrough. In a video message in 2014, Javad Zarif